Living in the 21st century, we take light for granted. Probably there are not very many moments in your life, Monica just shared one, where you are not just a button's push away from having as much light as you want. In fact, we have more light than we want. Light pollution is a thing. If you want to go out and see the night sky, it's a hard thing to do these days because we are saturated in light, and it's easy to take it for granted. But we've all probably had those moments when you didn't have light and you couldn't get light. Maybe for just a few seconds you go down to Shenandoah Caverns or someplace and they take you into the belly of the cavern and they turn the lights off and you experience that total blackness. I remember when I was a student missionary in Guyana, South America. I was in a little village of Kimbia there on the Berbice River. We were about an 8-hour boat ride from town, from civilization, no electricity, no running water. And we had flashlights, but sometimes it would be a month or two before you could get batteries, so they didn't last long. You had little kerosene lights that you could light and read by at night. But really what happened most of the time was when the sun went down, everybody went to bed, because there wasn't anything else to do. I remember I was going early on in my time there, I was going to visit somebody in the village, and usually you row everywhere, but they happened to be down the trail from where we were staying. And so I walked down the trail to their house, and I stayed there talking and praying with them, and I stayed a little longer than I should have. And I didn't bring a flashlight, and I left their house, and the sun had already gone down over the jungle, and it was getting dark. And that happened to be one of the nights where there wasn't a moon, and it was just a little bit cloudy. Now, there was enough dim starlight that for most of the path I could kind of make my way, but that path went through a stretch of jungle. And I remember just as I entered into that stretch of jungle, realizing that I was not going to be able to see anything. Like, I couldn't see my hands in front of me. I couldn't see my feet underneath me. And Guyana, there's wildlife there. There's scorpions and tarantulas. Even the ants there. If you step on an ant nest there, those ants will draw blood. But most of all, I was concerned about the snakes. We had some snake experiences. And so I just kept, as I was going through this stretch, imagining that I'm going to step on a snake, and I'm not going to know it until my foot is right on it. And so what I decided to do was I was going to walk without picking up my feet as much as possible. And I was going to kind of shuffle along the trail because I literally couldn't see anything. I just had to kind of feel my way. And it wasn't that long of a section, maybe 100 yards or so, probably not even that long. But it took me forever to get through the other side. And when I finally got out of that little jungle section, and there was some starlight again, and the moon started coming up over, I was so, so grateful. It's easy to take light for granted. In the ancient world, they didn't take it for granted as much as we do. And which is why I believe that this language of light is used so much to describe Jesus. There's this darkness until his arrival. And Matthew, quoting from Isaiah, says, "The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light." Just think about it. You're sitting in darkness because you can't see to walk, you can't see to move. You are sitting in darkness. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light, and upon those who sat in the region and shadow of death, light has dawned. Jesus is over and over again described as light. And if you think about light, light is not just what you see. Light is the thing that allows you to see. Light is what makes clear, makes visible everything else. So Jesus says, John chapter 9, "As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Now that's an interesting phrase, isn't it? How long is Jesus the light of the world? as long as he is in the world. The sun had risen on the world, but he's saying, as long as I'm here, I am the light of the world. And it's with that context, I want to go with you to the passage we're going to study today, Matthew chapter 5. And we're going to talk about the light of the world after Jesus is no longer in the world. Matthew chapter 5, we're going to look at verses 13 through 16. If you're using one of the Bibles in the seats underneath you, or page 938, Matthew chapter 5, we're going to start in verse 13. We're going to go down through 16. This is the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus has been saying things like, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And he says, blessed are you when you are reviled and persecuted, rejoice and be exceedingly glad. And then he says in verse 13, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So Jesus is the light of the world as long as he's in the world. But what about after he's gone? Is the world left in darkness? Who is the light of the world? We are the light of the world. Now, that makes us a little bit uncomfortable, right? How many of you feel confident in raising your hand and saying, I am the light of the world? It makes us feel uneasy, right? But Jesus, he's calling us the light of the world, not because he wants the world's attention on us, not because we're just the light that people see. He wants us to be the light of the world because we can be the light by which other people see. And what are they going to see? Who are they going to see? Right? Let your light so shine before men that they might see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. When Jesus was here as light of the world, who did he reveal? What did he reveal? What was in darkness before he came, and then it was illuminated with light afterwards? It was God and God's character. Jesus said, if you see me, you have seen the Father. In fact, John's gospel starts out, no man has seen God at any time, but the only begotten of the Father has declared him. Jesus is not just the light that people see, he was the light by which people could see God. For the first time, clearly, they could see who God is and what he's like. And when he calls us the light of the world, it's not that all of the attention is to be directed toward us, but through us, people are to see who God is. That they might see our good works and glorify God. By the way, God's glory is his character. We worship God not because of his power, because think if he had the same power but a different character. Would he be worthy of worship? We worship him because of his character, of his goodness, his faithfulness, his love, his mercy, his justice. God's glory is his character, and Jesus is saying you can shine a light by your good works upon God's good character. Okay, I think you're with me so far. Pretty basic ideas. Ellen White, pioneer, one of the pioneers of the Adventist church, prolific author, wrote some amazing things. One of a tremendous book she wrote, Ministry of Healing. Notice what it says on page 470. By the power of his grace, meaning God's grace, By the power of his grace manifested in the transformation of character, the world is to be convinced that God has sent his Son as Redeemer. How is the world to be convinced that God sent his Son, that Jesus is in fact our Redeemer? By God's grace being manifested in the transformation of our characters. That is the convincing argument. No other influence that can surround the human soul has such power as the influence of an unselfish life. The strongest argument in favor of the gospel is a loving and lovable Christian. The strongest argument in favor of the gospel is a loving and lovable Christian. I believe that's true. I believe the strongest argument that Jesus is who he said he is when people act like him in a loving way. When Christians are actually lovable. Sometimes we make it hard to love us, right? A loving and lovable Christian. But I also believe that the opposite of this is true. I believe that the strongest argument against the gospel is an unloving and unlovable Christian. Have you experienced that in your life? Far too often, the reason that people do not believe is because of the way that Jesus' followers act. They're unloving, they're unlovable, and if God is anything like them, I don't want to have anything to do with him. Friedrich Nietzsche, German philosopher, a famous, not just an atheist, but an anti-theist, meaning he believed that religion was harmful and destructive and needed to be dispensed with altogether. He is the one who famously said, God is dead. And one of the reasons that Nietzsche gives for his disbelief is the behavior of the Christians around him. I might believe in the Redeemer if his followers looked more redeemed. It's pretty cutting, isn't it? Because we talk about God's power to save and transform and his forgiveness and his love and his mercy and his justice, and then we're mean and proud and selfishness and impatient and bitter. And we don't look very much like the Redeemer who we talk about. And people say, no, thank you. Not interested. Jesus, later on in the Sermon on the Mount, uses this language. Matthew chapter 7, verses 16 to 18. We're on page 941. This is what he says. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. So let me ask you this. What is the fruit of Christianity? What is the fruit of Christianity? Love. Kindness. I mean, we could think about the fruits of the Spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. The fruit of Christianity is transformed lives. Isn't that the result? If Christ came to redeem, if he is the source and the life and the root, shouldn't redeemed people be the fruit? The fruit of Christianity is transformed lives. And how do people know that the tree is good? If the fruit is good, right? But if you're a bad apple and your coworker or your cousin or your neighbor takes a bite, what are they going to think about the tree? The fruit of Christianity is transformed lives, and untransformed lives are proof to the world that it doesn't work, that the thing is a fraud. That you talk so much about change and new hearts and transformation and new lives and born again and a new life. And yet, and church hurt is a real thing, isn't it? I think everybody in this room could not just think of one person, but could start making a list of people who have been mistreated and had God misrepresented to them, and ultimately they said, no, thank you. And can we really blame them? It's a real thing, isn't it? Church hurt is a real thing. You might remember some months ago, I shared with you some statistics about why people leave the Seventh-day Adventist Church. You guys remember talking about this? And we were in that sermon focusing especially upon young people. Why do young people leave the Adventist church? And we used some data by Alan Parker there at the SALT program at Southern Adventist University. He asked hundreds of former Seventh-day Adventists, he asked them this question: why did you leave? And here are their top answers categorized. And I want you just to look at these answers. The very top, more than half, I think it was 700 respondents, replied doctrinal disagreements. But right under that, not too far below, hypocrisy of members. And then if you start looking at some of the other categories, how many of these relate to the behavior of church members, the lack of Christ-like character, church members who are unloving and unlovable, right? And it is not so much Christ, but Christians who have turned so many people away. I want you to go back with me to Matthew chapter 5. Because I don't believe the situation was any better in Jesus' time. I believe temple hurt was a very real thing in Jesus' time. And the religious leaders had a way of loving those that were deemed worthy of love and judging and making life miserable for those who were deemed unworthy. Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward will you have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors. And I've got a footnote here that says actually Gentiles is a better translation there. Not translation, but it's a better representative of the original. Do not even Gentiles do the same. Therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Remember what Jesus said? Let your light shine before men so that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And here he's saying you need to love people with a different sort of love, a love that is representative of your Father, because your Father in heaven loves the just and he loves the unjust. His love is not dispensed only upon the worthy. He loves all, just as the rain is sent upon everybody, and your love should be representative of his love. So the type of light that we are called to be, the type of salt that we are called to be, the type of love that we are to have is not the easy sort of love, where you're nice to people in Sabbath school because they look nice and smell nice and usually talk nice. That's not what Jesus is talking about here. He's talking about a love that represents how God loves those who hate him. He loves those who are irritable and grumpy and slandering and unfair and cruel and vindictive and proud and lazy and whatever. He loves even his enemies. And he is calling you and I to not represent the world's kind of love, but to represent a different sort of character altogether. And the easy thing for me to do is to give myself a free pass and say, the way I act when everybody smells nice and dresses nice and talks nice is who I really am. But the way I act when that certain family member or that other person is mean or they're short-tempered or they're unfair, that's just because of that circumstance. And I give myself a pass, right? But Jesus is saying, is it really love if you're only loving those who reciprocate? Is it really love if you're only loving those who are giving you something back? Maybe that's just another form of selfishness in disguise. True love, God's sort of love, looks very different. The character that we are called to have looks very different. And why is this so important? You see, most people in history, God's people included, have misunderstood God's character and who he is. And they have assumed that God has an eye for an eye sort of love, a love your neighbor and hate your enemy sort of love. And if we are to shine light so that they glorify God's good works, we need to show them a different sort of love. Even in Jesus' day, the religious leaders of the Jewish nation had a view of God in the Old Testament that I believe did not fully represent his character. And Jesus had to show them a different sort of love, a different sort of character, a humility, an unselfishness, a putting others first, a patience, a meekness that they did not attribute to God. And it wasn't just the Jews. In the wider world where Christianity took root, the view of the gods was that their love, their characters were identical to humans. If you take Zeus, who the Romans called Jupiter, if you think about his character, did he love his enemies? No. He was unpredictable. He was jealous, vengeful, impulsive, domineering, lustful, deceitful, wrathful, capricious, unfaithful. He was good to those who were good to him and horrible to those who were not. And if the Gentiles were going to believe in a different sort of God, you see, the Gentiles, like Zeus, could love those who loved them, be good to those who were good to them. But if they were going to believe in a different sort of God, they would need to see a different sort of person. Somebody who loved in a different way and had a character that was completely unexpected. So what I want to do with you very quickly, I want to just take a very short tour with you through a few passages of the New Testament where Paul and Peter are taking this idea of being lights in the world, and they're expounding upon it to Gentiles, to Gentile Christians and Jewish Christians, and admonishing them how to live as light. And I want you just to see with me the sorts of things that they say, what it would mean for us to have good works that would glorify God. Are you with me? All right, so we're going to take a very quick field trip through the New Testament and look at how they applied this message of the Sermon on the Mount, that we are lights in the world to glorify God's character. Go with me to Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2. Philippians 2 is my favorite chapter in the whole entire Bible. It's amazing. It is an amazing chapter. Earlier in the chapter, Paul says things like, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus." And he admonishes the believers to consider others as better than themselves. Now just think about that statement for a minute. And he's not saying, oh, just think about other people in the church as better than yourselves. He's saying, I want you to think of all people that you encounter, think of that person as better than yourself. And we have a hard time with that because we say, well, they're not. That would be a lie. Because we think we know their faults clearly, and we don't see our own, right? But the Christian view says, I can see my sin, I can admit it and hold on to it, and I can assume the best about everybody else. So Paul says, consider others better than yourself. And notice what he says here. After he talks about how Jesus, who being in the form of God, humbled himself and became a man and a servant and humbled himself to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Notice what he says. Verse 14. Do all things without complaining and disputing. Now try that on for size. How many things? All things. Everything. Do not find yourself in a circumstance. And by the way, we talked about this in Sabbath school this morning. Paul is where when he's writing this letter? He's in jail. Doesn't know if his head is going to remain on his shoulders. And how many complaints do we find in his writings? None. In fact, he keeps saying things like, rejoice in the Lord always. Do all things. Don't think that you are deserving of a better, easier life than you have. Do all things without disputing and complaining, that you may become blameless and harmless, children of God without fault. Notice this, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as what? As lights in the world. Where does Paul get this idea that we're lights in the world? He got it from Jesus. He got it from the Sermon on the Mount. He's saying, don't complain, don't dispute. Live as harmless in the world. The world is crooked, it's perverse, it's messed up, I know, but you're its lights. and live that way. And by the way, let me be very clear here. Is Paul saying that we should be proud and arrogant because we are the lights of the world? No. He says being light of the world does not mean you pat yourself on the back. He's saying being light of the world means you think of other people as better than yourself, including the people outside of the church. It's not arrogance. It's humility. Self-renouncing love. Go with me, 1 Peter. I want you to notice how Peter takes these words and applies them. 1 Peter chapter 2. Rob, I think my iPad battery died. 1 Peter chapter 2, we're going to start in verse 9, page 1163. But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into marvelous light. Now notice, is Peter just talking to seminary students about to become pastors? No. He's talking to everybody, men, women, children in the church, and says, you guys all are priests. You are all representatives of God, every single one of you. Everybody who follows Jesus has been ordained to the priesthood of Jesus. The church does not have a priesthood. The church is a priesthood. Who were once not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. Beloved, I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works, which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. He says, you're lights. Conduct yourself honorable way, that when the Gentiles see you, they may glorify God. Where does Peter get this idea? It's taken straight from the Sermon on the Mount. And he's helping the people apply this. And he's going to go on to say what this looks like. And he's going to talk about submitting to the powers that be, fearing God. He says, honor the emperor. Does anybody know who is emperor at the time that Peter is writing this? Nero is emperor, and Nero is going to kill Peter. And he says, honor him. He doesn't say bow down to him. He doesn't say obey him above God, but be respectful. And then he talks about servants being submissive and faithful. He talks about wives and husbands. He talks about the way that we treat one another, even in difficult circumstances, as being opportunities for people to see God's goodness and his glory. Now, I just want you to ponder with me the audacity of what Peter is saying. Imagine you are a slave in the Roman Empire. Slavery is horrible. It's unjust. It's cruel. Shouldn't you have the right to rebel? To be angry? To be spiteful? To be vengeful? And I want you to see there's a spirit of submission, of love, of faithfulness, even to your enemy, your master, even to those who are unjust and treating you cruelly. Notice what Paul says. Go with me to 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 1. This is page 1142. Let as many bondservants as are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor. Now, let me be very clear what's happening here. Peter and Paul are not saying that slavery is good and okay, and that God is supportive of it. Paul makes very clear, God doesn't have favorites. In God's sight, there is no Jew or Gentile. There's no slave or free. There's no male or female. This is not what is being said here. Slavery is unjust and it's cruel. It's wrong. But notice the appeal to those who are being unjustly treated, cruelly treated, who are in bondage and servitude against their own will. Let as many bondservants as are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor, so the name of God and his doctrine may not be blasphemed. Why? For God's character. So people can see God's character. So they can see his goodness. Go with me. One more text here from Paul. Go with me to Titus. Titus chapter 2. Titus chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. Exhort bondservants to be obedient to their own masters, to be well-pleasing in all things, not answering back, not pilfering, but showing all good fidelity. Why? Why? That they may adorn the doctrine of God, our Savior, in all things. Now just think about this. Why? Why should a servant, why should a bondservant, why should a slave act this way? So they may adorn the doctrine of God. What's the doctrine of God? It's who he is, his character. It's the good news. It's the gospel, right? And he is saying that by their behavior, they may, notice that word? Adorn. What does it mean to adorn? Decorate it. You make it look nice. You bring attention to it. You put the best possible face on it, right? And he is saying that the way that you treat other people, even who are treating you unjustly and unfairly and cruelly, even those who do not deserve it, honoring those who don't deserve honor, blessing those who are persecuting, loving those who are hating, who are your enemies, being patient with those who are vexing. The way that you treat those people can adorn the doctrine of God, can make people see the goodness and the beauty that is there, can draw attention to them seeing God's character. And oh, maybe if they can love me, God can too. Maybe he doesn't hate me after all. Maybe he isn't cruel and unjust and unsympathetic after all. Let me tell you how this worked in early Christianity. Early Christianity was a religion that initially attracted the poor, attracted women, attracted migrants and refugees, and attracted slaves. Why? Because Christians love them. They fed the poor. They took care of those who were persecuted and oppressed. Women had equal status and were not seen as lesser than. Servants were valued and a part of the brotherhood. There in the Christian community, there was no slave or free, male or female, Gentile or Greek. And so they came in. And they became believers. And then they heard messages like this. That because Jesus Christ died for the unjust, we can live with kindness toward the unjust, and patience, and honor, and meekness, and humility. And you know what started to happen in that Roman Empire? Masters started seeing their slaves acting differently and started to become converted and having change of heart. There's all these accounts from early Christian authors about how an aristocratic or wealthy household would be won from the servants and the poor and the children and the women, and they would have an influence upon those above them. And the roots of Christianity began to spread throughout the empire. So much so that in just a few hundred years, the empire is going to change drastically and will eventually outlaw slavery. Something that would not have happened otherwise. Let me just give you two more examples of how the light, the character, the goodness of early Christians was transformative there in the Roman Empire. The Romans had a practice of infanticide, of exposing babies. Children, especially those who were the wrong gender or had disabilities, were often seen as an unwanted burden. And in Roman society, it was permissible, even ethical, for a parent to take a child and to go outside the city, to go to some area and just leave the child there. The thinking was, well, if the gods want to save them, they can. It's not my responsibility. And we know from archaeology that this practice was widespread. Even in Judea, they've found a sewer that was under a Roman bathhouse and have found more than 100 bones. So you know what the Christians started doing? They started saying, wait a minute, Jesus Christ died for that little girl or that little boy. And they would leave their houses in the middle of the night, and they would go out to these places, listening for the cries of babies. And they would take them in to their homes as their own children, as their own sons and their own daughters. And people began noticing the mercy, the love of the Christians. Christians also would go to camps where the Roman soldiers were training. Even during times of persecution, imagine Diocletian and other times where the emperor is persecuting Christians, banning them, dragging them into arenas, burning their books. And Christians would go with food and bandages to the camps of Roman soldiers and offer food, offer words of encouragement. They would sing songs for the soldiers in their camps and even bandage their wounds. And they began to take notice. There's a famous Roman soldier. He became a Christian, Pochemus. Young man, 20, 21, 22. Completely pagan in his worldview, dismissive of Christianity, was training in a camp. And here are these Christians bringing him food, singing songs, bringing words of encouragement. And he said to himself, who does that? Who acts that way? And he asked some of his fellow soldiers, and they said, oh, they do that because of their God. Because of the God that they worship. When he finished his time at camp, he went home to his village and found a Christian and was baptized, later becoming a missionary himself. So let me just say a few things here. We in Christianity, I believe, and this, I'm not saying this with pride, I'm saying this with awe and reverence. We have a God like no other, who would die for his enemies and pray, Father, forgive them. We have a God like no other. And yet, we far too often have misrepresented him by acting just like everybody else. If you have been church hurt, if the people of God have acted nothing like him, and have made it hard for you to believe and to trust, I want to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. And I want you to know that God is not that way. You can trust him. You can love him. And if you are someone who you know you haven't represented him, you know that your character has given the wrong sort of impression, let me just say this. A humble, sincere apology goes a long way. A humble, sincere apology goes a long way. And it's not too late. Because I believe that God is real, that there will be fruit, that our lives can be transformed if we let him. If we let him. So here's my appeal. You're a light. You are helping other people form their opinions about God, whether you like it or not. Let us go out there and make God look good. Because he is. Because he is. God bless you.